Look at this beautiful thing. It's amazing. That little lens is the Fuji 200mm f2, a lens that I just was blown away by. I reached out to B&H and they actually lent it to me over the past month to do a review on, and I have been blown away by it since the first moment I put it on my camera. I love it a lot, but I want to review it more than just that, saying that I love it in this review, so stay tuned. We're going to talk about this lens, what's good, what's bad, what I like, what I don't like. Let's go ahead and dive into the review. I want to start this review by talking about the different things that this kit comes with, because it's not just the lens. Obviously the lens is included as one of the things, but in addition, Fuji actually includes a 1.4x tele-extender or teleconverter, whatever you want to call it. They call it a teleconverter. There's many different names for it. But what a 1.4x teleconverter is going to do is it's going to make your lens a little bit longer. In this case, 1.4x longer. So if you take the 200mm and multiply it by 1.4, that's the new focal length of the lens. Now, one thing to keep in mind with a 1.4 teleconverter in particular is that you're going to lose a stop of depth of field. So naturally this lens is f2. It would become f2.8 when you put the teleconverter on the back of the lens. But that's included, and apparently this is their new version. This is their version 2 teleconverter, which is supposedly a little bit sharper than the other version. So that's kind of nice. Also, the lens comes with a bag, which is great. Good to have a bag with these lenses. In addition, there are actually a strap that comes with this bag, and it has its own mounting points on the lens itself. So if you are carrying a camera like this, instead of using the standard camera strap attachments, you actually attach the strap to the lens, because that lowers the center of gravity with what you're carrying, and it's just better on the whole system. So that strap's included, case is included, lens is included, and the 1.4 teleconverter is included, which is pretty awesome. Next, I want to take a look at what buttons and dials are on the lens itself. So first thing is, it has 4 little customizable buttons around the outside, and I imagine most people would customize these to be like focus or something like that. I didn't mess with these myself because I've had these on Canon lenses in the past, and really that's not for me. I'm not used to really pushing a button with my left hand. So for me, my focus is on my back. I'll use the back button focus with my thumb, but that's what those are for. We've got a focus ring, which is awesome right here. No zoom ring because this lens doesn't zoom, obviously. And then we've got our aperture ring. And the nice thing about all Fuji lenses is that they have a physical aperture dial. So if you are looking to change the aperture, you literally can just twist this dial. Now, it should be said, those of you who want a more traditional aperture changing experience, and by traditional I mean like DSLR-like, I guess this is more traditional since this is from like back in the day with film cameras. But if you want a more DSLR-like aperture experience with like a thumb dial or a finger dial, you can totally do that too. It's in the settings of the camera. That's a Fuji thing. They can do that. So you have your choice. A couple other little things. We've got some switches over here. A switch for focus limiting. And what focus limiting does is, instead of the lens being able to focus through its whole range from, however many feet to infinity, it limits that range a bit. And what that lets you do is it makes the autofocus a little bit snappier. And we'll talk more about autofocus in a bit. But if you can limit the range, meaning if your subject is far enough away from you and will stay far enough away from you, I would definitely recommend it. That focus limiter will really help things be a little bit snappier with your autofocus. Second thing is optical image stabilization. I tested this on the X-H1 Fuji body. So for me, I had image stabilization built into the body. But if you don't, if you have maybe an XT series camera or X Pro series camera, you have the option here to turn on the optical image stabilization in the lens, which really, really helps. Makes things a lot smoother. You can shoot at a much slower shutter speed. And then finally, there are some autofocus presets that you can switch with this dial right here, as well as a set button down at the bottom here. A couple other little exterior features that I was really happy about. This foot down here actually has an Arca Swiss plate. The etchings, the dovetail, is actually milled into the foot. So you don't have to buy an additional quick release plate to put on the bottom of your lens. You've actually got that Arca Swiss attachment right there, which is really awesome for those of us who use Arca Swiss. It's also tapped for 3/8 and quarter on the bottom of this foot. So if you want to screw it into something that uses a 3/8 inch thread, you can do that as well. So I really appreciated them doing that. Obviously, this foot rotates. You can loosen this dial right here and rotate the foot out of the way when you're hand holding, and you can put it back when you're ready to use a tripod again. In addition, this lens hood comes off. off. It's massive. I love this thing. So cool. Also, look how pretty that is. Nice little Fuji logo. It's green. I really like the look of it. But you can see that front element. It's 105mm filters. I can't imagine how much a polarizer would cost. I didn't look it up. But you can see that. Also, the lens hood has a little cutout right here that you can open, boop, 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 and that will let you turn the polarizer if you have a polarizer on the lens. So kind of nice. That's the exterior of the lens. I'm really happy with it. It feels really good. It looks really good. It's got this nice silvery white finish to it. Overall, I think they nailed the exterior and the buttons and the layout of the lens. Really felt at home. Felt a lot like a Canon or a Nikon 200 or 300mm lens, except it's a little bit smaller. It's a little stubbier. It just kind of feels like it's light. It kind of picks it up. It has a good feel to it. So I think Fuji nailed that. Next thing I want to talk about is sharpness. Sharpness is pretty much key with a lens. Like if it's not sharp, you might as well not buy it. When you spend $6,000, which this lens costs, it should be pretty sharp, and it is. It really exceeded my expectations. Even at f2, well to the edges, things are tack sharp. It's awesome. It's a fixed lens, which helps that sharpness happen, and it also is a long lens, which also is a little bit easier to make a very long lens sharp. Not very long, but a longer lens sharp versus a very wide lens sharp. So there's a lot of things going for it. It doesn't disappoint. Good job, Fuji. You guys did great. I really appreciate it being sharp. Let's talk about the uses involved with this lens. I see this lens as being very much a sports photographer, wildlife photographer, landscape photographer type of lens. It's a little bit longer than what you would traditionally use for portraiture. You definitely could, but you're going to be more yelling to your subject versus having that more intimate interaction with them. So you could totally do it. You could also use it for street photography, but again, you're really pushing that limit. That one-to-one interaction is not there. So I really see this as like a sports, wildlife, or landscape lens where you're coming in close. Thing is, with sports and with wildlife, one of the most key elements of a lens is autofocus performance, because if you can't get the animal sharp or you can't get the athlete sharp, it's really not worth it. It's might as well just not use the photo. So I want to take a turn and talk a little bit about autofocus with this lens. To start with, this lens is by far the fastest autofocusing lens I've used on my Fuji camera. So let's just get that out of the way. As far as the lens is concerned, they did an amazing job. It's very snappy, it's very fast at focusing, and it holds focus very well. I tested it on an X-H1, a Fuji X-H1, with all of the default autofocus settings, just to try to see what it would be like for someone who didn't know much about autofocus to get it out of the bag, start using it and see what it was. I also tuned it a little bit with some different autofocus settings, and I actually found that the default settings worked the best. That's the lens. The bad comes in where we just start talking about mirrorless and autofocus in general. It's not up to DSLR levels, and I'm not just saying that about the Fuji. Every mirrorless camera I've used, whether it's the Sony A7 or the Fuji or the Olympus, the snappiness of autofocus is just not there. Now, I haven't used the Sony A9, I haven't used the new Canon or the new Nikon, so I can't speak to those. But with the mirrorless cameras I've used, they're just not as quick. They're not as fast as those Canon and Nikon DSLRs are. And that's a little bit of a bummer for wildlife and sports photographers. The autofocus of this lens, it is the fastest I've used with Fuji, but it's still not up to the level of Canon or Nikon. Couple quick things to add in on autofocus. The problem that I really had with this lens was that the initial acquiring of focus, meaning when I pushed in that back button and it was blurry, and I hold it in and I'm waiting for it to find focus, that initial step of it searching for focus took way too long. I'd be shooting a football game and the quarterback would throw the ball, I'd swing my camera over to the catcher, whoever's grabbing that ball out of the air, and it just like, the ball would be caught by the time the camera focused and I was able to take a picture. In fact, sometimes the ball would be caught and the person who caught it would be tackled before I was able to achieve focus. And that's just not acceptable. It did not make it fast enough. Once it acquired though, once it nailed that focus, it was able to track very well. So like, you know, if I was shooting like a race, I shot a race with this lens, I had runners running toward me, and as soon as it grabbed a runner's face, it was like, boom, it just stuck to them perfectly, click, 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 all the way through. Every shot was sharp. But that initial acquiring of autofocus, getting that initial focus point, that was the part that it struggled with. So I would kind of leave the autofocus discussion with this. If you're used to the way mirrorless cameras work, and I went into this expecting that result, then this lens will be great for you. If you're okay with that occasional delay, occasional frustration, then there you go, it's that. But if you're not okay with that and you're coming from a Nikon or a Canon and you've been using like a 1D series or a D4 in the Nikon world, something that's very fast, this will frustrate you. And that's, I think, true with all mirrorless cameras. They just have not caught up, for the most part, with DSLRs. Now, the good news is this. I think the problem with the autofocus, a lot of it lies in the camera, not in the lens. So if mirrorless is something that you want to invest in and you know you want to stick with it, this might be a really good investment to buy a lens like this. Obviously, $6,000 is a big investment, but I bet my hunch says that if you were to buy this lens, a couple iterations of bodies down the line, the autofocus is going to be up to DSLR levels. So I think the lens here is a little bit ahead of the technology in the body, at least when it comes to that fast autofocus performance. Landscape photographers, if you're using this lens, or portrait photographers, when you have a little bit more time to get that focus, I think it's fantastic. I'm only being really hard on it because a 200 f2, the way I see it, is a wildlife, or more specifically, a sports lens. And when you need that sports, you need that quick autofocus, so I'm gonna be really hard on the lens. That's my deal. Overall, I loved it. My experience using this lens was awesome. I really wish I didn't have to mail it back. Unfortunately, it's due back this week, so I have to mail it, but it was great. If I had $6,000 and I was really wanting to do a lot of sports photography, I would drop it down on this lens in a second. I think that with more time, I would probably become more used to the fact that that autofocus takes a little bit more to track, but overall, just a wonderful, wonderful lens. I hope you liked this video. If you did, drop a thumbs up. I would love that like button to be hit because it helps our videos grow up in the search results. Also, for those of you who don't know and are new and watching this video and maybe thinking about buying this lens, we make weekly videos and they're pretty awesome. So you should definitely hit that subscribe button down in the corner. Also, one last thing I want to say before I say a special thank you is we actually have an open house here at RMSP. We're a photography school. We teach people how to do photography. We teach people how to do video. And if you're interested in learning and starting a career in photography, we have an open house coming up this coming month in December. You guys should come check it out. You can spend the whole day with us. We'll teach you kind of what we're all about. You can see our classroom, see our space, kind of learn who RMSP is. So definitely check that out on our website. There's a link down in the description to do that. Finally, special thanks to Canon. This is kind of a funny video because it's shot on Canon cameras. It's about a Fuji lens, and the Fuji lens was donated by, or borrowed to us by B&H. So really 3 sponsors coming together, but thank you to Canon. They provided this camera right here that you guys are watching this on. If you have a question, leave it in the comment section down below and hit that subscribe button yet again because it will be awesome, and I promise you will get good content every single week. Thanks, guys.